Hiya, I'm Luke. I've been doing reenactment with Regia for about 3 years now. Sometimes when I'm around on the Wick like this I call myself Izzy, and I normally do bone working, bronze and metal alloy working, occasionally woodworking depending on what needs done at the time. Just whatever kind of strikes my fancy. There's a lot of different things you can do when doing reenactment. There's lots of different skills and crafts, but this is the one that I quite enjoy. Down here, so you can see I've got a little stump anvil with a wee, what's called in modern words, a Pritchett hole, but it's really just a hole through it. It's useful for punching or drifting, but it's also useful for making, if you can see just there, with little what's called a boss cap rivet. A boss cap head, 4 rivets which you find in northwestern insular British Isles, or what might be called Hiberno-Norse areas, so kind of like Cumbria, Ireland, Scotland, something like that. They often, instead of having a head on a rivet like you see there, or like this one, you can see it's a shank with just a wee head on it. You can see that. What you normally find is they'll do that, and I think that's not quite fancy enough, so they want something which is a little bit more pronunciation, just like that. And it's just made from, normally just called copper alloy, because it's not often that you get it properly analysed. It's normally, so it's copper and something else, sometimes zinc, sometimes tin, but sometimes you just don't know, you have to guess. So what you do to make one is you get yourself a blacksmith who can make you some nice thin strips like this, and then I'll put it into the fire until it's red hot, hold it there for a few seconds and I'll quench it. And what that does is it makes it nice and soft. So instead of having, this is so it's nice and springy, you can see that there, it kind of springs back on it. When you anneal it, it just bends. If it springs back, it won't take that nice dome shape that you see there, and it might tear or rip. So you want a nicely annealed strip, about 1/2 mil thick. If it's too thick it won't go, if it's too thin it will just tear. And you'll get yourself a punch. Full disclosure, this is a modern punch with a hardened steel bull end, but in period we don't think we have any fines, but you can well imagine a piece of metal or even a piece of oak or strong heartwood with a nice rounded hemispherical head would do the job as well. And you can see just there, the hole is just a little bit bigger than the punch. If it's the exact same size, it's not going to go down, it's just going to rip it. If it's too small, you won't get a nice sharp edge. So you just pop it on, line yourself up in the middle. Sometimes I just do a quick guidance hole on this soft stump. So you can see there's a wee little divot there. That lets me figure out where the edge is. I'll put it in the middle. I'll grab myself my punch, and I'll go 1, 2, and I'll go like this. I'll try and get every corner, get a nice sharp transition from the flat to the round. Hopefully it's not torn. You can see obviously the side's a bit black. Let me just rub it a wee bit. You should be able to see we've got a little dome going on there, but it is still quite shallow. I might want that a bit deeper. So what I'll do is I'll just hit it again. Not testing the material too much, because copper alloy is a material that work hardens. And what that means is the more you work it, the harder it gets. And if it got too hard, it would tear, and I need to give it back to my blacksmith to anneal it again. You see we've got a nice sweet dome there. And I might take something like this, which is a hammer made of a deer's antler. So it's not as hard as this metal is, which would mark what I'm working with, but it is hard enough to flatten out our edges around here, and I can pop it in here as well. Move it around a wee bit, and then you get a nice transition between there. So now I think my awl has gone wokies. But what you want to do, obviously, if you want to put a rivet through it, something like this is just a piece of wire that's been sharpened at one end and has been ever so slightly domed at the other. Actually, I could probably use this. What you could do is you take your punch that you used to make that dome in the first place, you put it in your stump there, and you just go like that, and you get a wee little divot. And you do the same thing again. and that should receive it quite nicely because it's made from the exact same punch. And we'll just make sure that fits quite nicely. You don't want any empty space, because if you try and punch it with empty space, you're going to tear it again or deform it, which you don't want, obviously. Now, let's just see how this goes. We're going to use this one just to punch a teensy little hole as close to the centre as you can get. If it's not in the centre, that's fine. There's plenty of finds where the holes aren't quite in the middle, where the domes are all different sizes and it all looks a bit funny. But you can see, or maybe you can't, there's a tiny little hole just right at the top there. It's a bit difficult to see, it's slightly easier from this side I think. See that there? And it's made quite a sharp, rough bit on the top. Now you don't want that. So what you could do is just tap your nail in to start, pop it back on your wee Pritchell hole here, take it and just send it all the way through. There you go, so you see that fits quite nice, and that gives you a rough idea almost of how it would look when it's actually on a belt. It's a bit high right now, but you can always sort that out later on by just hammering it a bit more. Now what you do is you get a pair of basically large scissors, we call them tin sips now, which I don't have any with me at the moment unfortunately, but it's just they're just scissors with a longer handle. You'd cut out roughly around that. You can't get it perfectly because you might end up damaging the dome if you go too close, and then that same hole that we used to punch in the first place, you would just put it back in and you'll have a load of sharp, jaggedy, rough bits, and you don't want that obviously. So you'd get a file, you just put it on the top and you'd go over it while it's in that wee divot, and the small sharp bits will just get brought away and the actual dome itself will be left absolutely fine. And because we've punched it, it's work hardened, so it's now going to be harder and it won't bend back in on itself. And you can make your belts look all nice and fancy and not boring like this one here. Okay, so that's making boss cap rivets from a copper alloy. Possibly they might not have used this kind of anvil, they might have just done it in a stump. They might not have used metal stumps. Sorry, they might not have used metal punches. We don't know. We don't find any, but it's best guess. So I think that's that. The boss cap rivet.